Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, you're going to meet a man who I'm going to call the CSI of data. He's a world-renowned research scientist who's going to change the way you look at marketing and research. That's just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox. Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, every day on the news, we see these polls and studies and surveys, and sometimes you scratch your head and you say to yourself, you know, what were they measuring? Who are they talking to come up with that result? Somebody who knows a lot about that is Dr. Edward Thurcher, who started his own company a few years ago, Rincón Associates. Thanks for coming on the show.
Very glad to be here. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, so what is the media getting wrong? What are the polling companies getting wrong? Are they talking to the wrong people? Are they measuring the wrong thing?
Well, many of the people in the media and the journalism world have not had the opportunity to take courses in their preparation, their training on the dramatic shifts in the population that we're currently witnessing. Now, this community is demographically, linguistically much more diverse than they used to be. And now it's becoming a bigger challenge to include people from different race, ethnic groups, because the research industry is still using traditional models of the past and have not adapted their techniques to the linguistic and cultural demands of the new demographic segments.
And a lot of times they're just not doing the homework at all. They're working on previous assumptions. We were talking before we went on the air about the food deserts in southern Dallas. What were you saying?
Yes. One of the research projects that I undertook recently, the last 2 years, was the food desert issues, which is a national problem. But here in Dallas, Texas, we happen to have in Dallas County, Texas, 88 food deserts. Half of them are concentrated in one region of the community, South Dallas, which is predominantly African American and Hispanic, lower income. And those food deserts have very little in the way of healthy food options, mostly convenience stores and other small grocery type of stores that also wind up costing them more money. And they, for decades now, this community has not seen it important enough to provide that community a mainstream supermarket with nutritious food options. So that's one challenge that we undertook. We conducted an extensive research study, and lo and behold, we found out that there was money in that community. We found out that the crime rates weren't nearly as bad as everybody thought they were, because we analyzed actual crime data from the Dallas Police Department. And we used information from the Department of Agriculture and the Food Marketing Institute to confirm that this community actually earns millions of dollars, and they also spend millions of dollars. The one interesting thing is that they're not spending it in their communities because there are few healthy food options there. So they're having to go outside of their communities. We call that retail leakage, and spend all of those millions of dollars in other communities while their own communities remain food deserts without viable, nutritious food options.
We're going to show a page off your website because you've worked with some major companies that are coming to you. Look at those names. That's a who's who. Frito-Lay. I mean, you've got some Fortune 500 companies, Coca-Cola. They come to you because they're not getting the real numbers. Is that right?
Well, they're getting numbers, okay? But as to who's preparing, I can't disparage any competitors out there that are fortunate enough to do business with those corporations. But I can say that I've reviewed some of the research studies and some of the conclusions that they've reached, and even large corporations sometimes miss the mark. And part of that reason is because recent graduates and past graduates have never attended a research class that shows them what are the common sources of bias that you're going to run into in studying Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians. So everybody is kind of on a sort of like in a need of increasing their cultural intelligence. And interestingly, I created a few years ago, I created a test. I like to create tests just sometimes for curiosity to see what's going on in the marketplace. I created what I call a Latino IQ test, or a test of Latino culture. And I was wanting to know, okay, how much knowledge do Latinos and non-Latinos really know about Hispanics, the U.S. Hispanic population? So it was a simple 20 item multiple choice test that covered demographic trends, lifestyle, culture, language, research practices. And I administered it to a non-random sample of a population of students, as well as advertising, corporate executives, and academics. And lo and behold, what I found is that out of 50 items, only half of the 400 people that took that Latino IQ test answered items correctly. What was more surprising is the Latinos who responded to the IQ test did not do much better than non-Latinos. So it kind of threw out the whole assumption that just because you're Latino, you have some kind of a cultural edge in Hispanic marketing. Well, all of us need more education, not just Latinos and non-Latinos. All of us need the academic world to step up to the plate.
Absolutely.
And start new courses in multicultural research and advertising.
And you specialize in some of the fastest growing demographics in the country. In fact, you've become a media darling. The media calls you when there's a big story. You were interviewed recently. Let's talk about this story. This was the hack attack against the largest meat supplier. What was the topic of your discussion?
Well, I think the nature of the story, the scope of the story, was to try to understand what impact this may have on the food industry, and how likely are we to experience something similar in the future. I think at this point, in retrospect, everybody has real cause for worry, because these hackers seem to be getting away with what they're doing, undermining our infrastructure, food systems, and who knows, next thing it'll be energy systems. And so I was basically asked to just discuss, what impact is that going to have on the average consumer, the restaurants? Well, it's going to definitely lead to food shortages. It did, in fact, for a good while. Prices were increasing, but not so much, because retailers don't like to increase prices, especially if they don't think it's going to be a prolonged period of time. And some communities had, like Dallas-Fort Worth, it's a large urban center. They have many more food suppliers than other smaller communities. So they're not as likely to be hurt as much by an interruption in the food system supply as much. And of course, those people that are more dependent on meat for their sustenance, were also, and steak restaurants and places like that, those are the ones that are also going to be suffering and hurting more from that we call it temporary interruption. But the only reason it was temporary is because they were paid millions of dollars to move on to somebody else.
Understood. And you also wrote a groundbreaking book. Go ahead and grab it and hold it up for the camera so we can see it. Tell us more about the culture of research.
Well, the culture of research is a labor of love that I worked on for almost 4 years. And I wanted to basically summarize in one book the experiences that I've had over the past 45 years in conducting research with African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians in the U.S. And I'm a firm believer that nobody has to repeat all the errors and all the mistakes that I made over my career. If I can just document them and share the book with others, so that they can plan a multicultural study that is going to minimize the kinds of errors that are often made, with those particular groups. And my hope is, and there have been 2 universities that have already adopted it for their curriculum and their graduate students. And my hope is that other universities will add this book to their, it's not just for business graduates. It actually, the book addresses different disciplines like healthcare, research in healthcare, in politics, in the legal area, and other industries too, sociology, psychology, because the kinds of problems that are persistent in multicultural research go across different disciplines. So the book is really a good asset. It's not a substitute for traditional research classes. It's more like a partner. You know, it allows an instructor to address issues that they don't have the expertise or the time to cover on their own.
Well, I can't think of a time in our lifetime when your information has been more vital. We also want to talk about your expert witness service. We're going to put up on the screen more about that. Tell us what kind of cases you weigh in on.
Well, I've been asked to weigh in on the variety of cases, murder trials, injury, death cases, contract disputes, etc. And in the case of, just to give an example, in the case of the legal community, sometimes there could be a murder trial, defendants, and the lawyers are trying to argue for a change of venue because there's been too much publicity that could negatively impact their client's case. So the only one way to argue for a change of venue is to say, okay, the jury pool is mostly white, doesn't reflect the community as compared to what the census tells us. So if there's a disparity between the jury pool demographics and the census demographics, then we need to change it somewhere else where they'll get a fair trial. Absolutely. I get brought in to calculate the disparities, and sometimes the lawyer, the plaintiff's lawyer, wins. He gets to change the case to another industry community. Sometimes it has to stay there. I've also worked with personal injuries, workplace injuries too, where this company was being sued because their employees were being injured in the operation of laundry equipment. And it happened that the employees were mostly African American and Korean. And so the focus of the research that we did was to try to evaluate if they understood the hazard warning signs associated with their job. Because hazard warning signs are, in most cases, considered to be universal, have universal meaning or cross-cultural meaning, that almost anyone could understand it, but that's not the case. Wow. Warning signs do convey different meanings to different cultures sometimes, and it could lead to injuries. And in fact, they were already being sued for those types of things. So the research that we do sometimes looks at life and death issues, not just consumer products or what brand we get brought into issues related to COVID-19, alcohol liver disease trends, and how we can reverse the trend of Latinos in Texas having some of the highest alcohol liver disease mortalities of any known group in Texas. So it's an interesting place to work.
I think you have a fascinating career, and congratulations on your success. We're going to end by putting up your website. Why don't you go ahead and give us the domain name?
It's www.rinconasssoc.com.
Outstanding. Dr. Rincón, thank you so much for coming on the show.
I enjoyed it.
You bet.
Thank you.
That's it for now. We'll see you next time.